Thanks for staying with us here on TVC Breakfast. Now, the federal government has called for comprehensive review of fuel transportation safety protocols across the country following the tanker explosion in Jigawa State. The president, through the vice president, expressed deep sympathy for the families of the over 100 lives lost and many injured and promised swift intervention from the government. He also restated his directive to the FRSC to strengthen night travel measures, such as increased patrols, stricter enforcement of safety regulations, and other highway safety mechanisms. Right now, the death toll has increased to 170, with more than 100 critically injured. Let's talk this through by speaking with our guest in Abuja, the group CEO of Global Investment and Trade Company, Baba Yusuf. Thank you so much for joining us on TVC Breakfast. Looking at the incident that happened in Jigawa State, where we have more than 170 people dead and some still battling for their lives in different hospitals, spreading up to Kano. What's your reading of this latest development? Do you think it was avoidable?
Thank you very much, Ibrahim and Kemi, for having me. I use this opportunity to commiserate with the people of Jigawa and the families that have lost their loved ones and properties. It's a tragedy yet again, and we pray that God will repose the souls of those that have passed on, and God grant healing to those that are critically injured. It's early, Ibrahim, to really ascertain categorically the root cause of this particular incident. But from what I have gathered, by the way, I'm from Kano. Kano and Jigawa are neighboring states, and we have families across, the locations. From what we gathered is that from word of mouth, and even what we can read in the newspapers and on the media, that the driver sort of lost control of the vehicle and got marooned into a marshy area, in Majia, which is a kind of village in Taura local government, and Taura under Ringin local government. But we will wait, rather not to preempt the investigative agencies to really ascertain the root cause. But let us do quickly step back, follow up to the presidential order on the investigation, to do a quick trend assessment of these incidences, Ibrahim and Kemi. In September 2024, which is just slightly over a month ago, a tanker, carrying cattle, a tanker, had an incident with another vehicle carrying cattle in Lapai, on the Lapai Agay Road in Niger State. Over 50 people were burnt alive. A lot of properties lost. September 25th, which is about a month ago again, a petrol tanker carrying about 50,000 liters of petrol rammed into a Sienna bus right here in Abuja at an intersection called the Farmers Market intersection in Maitama, and there was a destruction of vehicles. Luckily enough, no life was lost. Why? Because it was in the center of Abuja, so there was quick intervention of the fire service. But then again, April this year, in Eleme, River State, on an Aleto bridge, there was also a petrol tanker that was leaking fuel that led to an explosion in a long stretch of a traffic jam. It was very bad, a lot of destruction of vehicles. Luckily enough, no lives were lost and slight injuries. Then October last year, 11 vehicles were burnt due to tanker explosion on Igomu Bridge in Lagos. I'm sure you are aware of that. Then you can go on and on in Cross River, in Benue State. Most of them are either due to leakages of the tankers or due to collisions, or in some cases, like in the case of this particular incident, you can also allude it, even in the case of the collision, sometimes due to fatigue, of drivers that may probably be overworked moving these tankers from either Lagos or somewhere in the southern part of Nigeria, up north to wherever they are going, anywhere in Nigeria. But essentially, I think the root cause of this incident will be, authoritative in this particular case of Jigawa when it comes. But I did a quick snapshot of the trend to tell you that this is becoming, more frequent, and you can see the footprints across the states. 2019, 2016, you remember what happened in Lagos in 2016 as well, and 2019 as well. So this is a trend, and I am happy that Mr. President said we should investigate. But I think during conversations, we'll also raise some very salient points that the people concerned should take note of.
The conversation should also get enhanced at this point, don't you think? When we look at how best, for tankers to be transported, really, because as you have reeled out, the figures that readily come to mind, it's really no state appears to be spared. The trucks are everywhere and the risks are everywhere. So in terms of, your own form of recommendations as to safety measures that these tankers, that government can do to ensure that this tankers or the tanker drivers, abide by them, what would it be for you?
Okay, there are 4 areas we have to look at, Kemi. First of all, let's start from the easier ones and move to the more difficult ones. We mentioned leakages of the tankers, so we start from there. There should be a process, an SOP issue within the, the downstream sector operators that have either the ones that have their own logistics value chain. In the case of the petroleum marketers, some of them have their own tankers, they have their own logistics value chain, while some of them are using outsourced, logistics. Whatever it is, there must be an internal standard operator to ensure that all these tankers, before they leave the depots, or to tank fast, there is a check to ensure that there are no leakages before they leave, their depots to their destination. That is one. I also know from my experience of providing services for some of these downstream sector, organizations, when we are doing their strategies, to know that they are supposed to be having some points at some various points from their point of pickup to point of destination where they have stopovers, and they have technical team that are supposed to be checking these vehicles. Are those checks being done still within the standard operating procedure, cycle? But then again, while we ask the organization to do it, what is the regulator doing to ensure that all these things are in place, that the players are putting all the safety measures in place to ensure that this vehicle in transit have all that are required to provide, first of all, the safety for the drivers and their operators, bus boys and all that, and also safety of the product. And then when it happens, what do we have in the tankers or in the trucks to provide first-time intervention for these trucks? For example, in the case of what happened in Jigawa, it's very pathetic because it happened in a remote area, where you don't get the intervention. Like I mentioned, in the case of the farmers market in Abuja, it is in the center of town. But in this case of Maje in Taura, it is an average location of 100 kilometers, averagely, from Taura to Hadeja or Birnin Kudu or Jahun or Duse or Kanu. Average, some 95, some 120 kilometers. So even the people that were injured, that were taken to provide intervention for them, the federal medical center in Taura cannot take more than 17 people in Ringim. So they have to move 40 people, 30 people to places very far. So what am I saying? Sometimes these incidences happen at remote locations, even not at those stopovers of the downstream sector operators. So this is something that government needs to, put in mind. That is one. Two, in some cases, it's not collision. We can hear in the case of Jigawa again, and in the case of Cross River and some areas in Benue, when it happened, people were going to scoop fuel. It is instructive to know that what happened in Jigawa, the root cause of the tragedy is that people were rushing to scoop fuel. Now, this will be a function of sensitization, mass sensitization, not just by the oil and gas industry like the NNPC, for example, but the Nigerian Orientation Agency has a lot of work to do. These are the kind of agencies of government that should do a lot of sensitization to talk to people in their mother tongue, in their dialects, all across Nigeria, and use pictorial, representations to show the dangers of rushing to school fuel, when this kind of incidences happen. Of course, you cannot take out the possibility of people still keeping a deaf ear due to what? Desperation. Desperate people do desperate things. The economy is biting hard, but then it is important for us to do the needful to sensitize people. I believe if people know the dangers, as much as possible will reduce. For example, in Jigawa, could you imagine there is a woman? How did they know it's a woman? She got burnt alive with her baby strapped on her back. The only way they knew she's a woman, they saw the baby gummed on her back. This is kind of tragedy that happens due to lack of information. I know there's desperation, but the traditional rulers, the religious leaders, the community leaders, the churches, the mosques also have a role to play over and beyond government. But the safety mechanism of the players and the regulators to also be sure that all the necessary things are done, and drivers also, they should be sure they don't overwork their drivers to be sleeping or to be misbehaving on the road. Very important. Of course, the maintenance of the vehicle, tires, are they okay and all that? This is part of the safety.
Mr. Yusuf, earlier you were trying to talk to us about 4 different things that, areas of concern in ensuring that we do not have this recurrent, issue coming up again. First and foremost, you mentioned the safety protocol, and then you were talking about the awareness, lack of education and all of that. But do you think there is enough education to be given to people who know that this is a combustible, a substance, chemical that can actually, flare up any time due to, sudden misgivings or sudden actions that we tend to do when we have this incident on our roads? Do you think there is not much information about the safety, about the danger this particular substance, pose to the lives and property of people? What you also mentioned 2 other things you had in mind.
That, Ibrahim, the level of lack of education in this country is beyond what you can imagine. Let's take, for example, what happened in Majia in Jigawa, or what happened in this village I forgot in Benue. People living in remote places do not understand what you use the word combustible. They understand combustibility from the point of view of proximity. You have kerosene, you pour kerosene, you go close, you strike the match, it catches fire. They don't understand how volatile PMS is, for example. From a layman perspective, somewhere in the remote village, somewhere, they just feel it is petrol, it is a liquid, and it is far away from the truck that has, capsized, and it has, the product is rolling on the ground. They just feel it is liquid. They can just go and scoop it. They don't understand that one slight spark from 100 meters away or 500 meters away will ignite and immediately explode, covering almost 1 kilometer radius, Ibrahim. A lot of them don't understand those consequences. So it is important to continue talking to people, to continue communicating to them. Most of the people in those villages, Ibrahim and Kemi, they don't deal with PMS, they deal with petrol. Most of them see petrol on the road, apart from those that are doing black markets. So the viscosity and the volatility of PMS and its consequences is very important to continue drumming it into the ears of people. We cannot assume they know, because obviously they don't know. There's a knowledge aspect of it. There's a cultural aspect of it because of corruption. You see something that is not your own, you want to go and scoop it. So you need to dimension, and that's why I mentioned the community leaders, whether it is religious or cultural or whatever leaders, to speak to people. And then there is the multidimensional poverty aspect of it, that people, even though knowing the dangers, don't forget these things are happening even in pipelines. People in the Niger Delta go to the pipelines and puncture the pipelines to scoop oil. So there's an issue of value erosion, there's an issue of desperation, and somebody will tell you, according to Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's very difficult to start talking about decency and rationale when people are multidimensionally poor. Now, moving on to the other, so sensitization is very important, not just for the people in the village. Consistently, I'm sure you do your safety drills in TVC. They will not assume that you know. Weekly, monthly, there's a standard operating procedure to continue reminding people. Moving on from there, the 2 other aspects I think that should be considered is the decay of our critical infrastructure. Ibrahim Akemi, our roads are so bad. Sometimes it's not because the driver is tired or because the tires are bad. It's simply because maybe there are so many potholes, the state of the roads are so bad, and most of these people move in the night. You know, there's no enough lighting. So we should also look at, I know it's a long-term thing, but government should also consider it as a holistic solution. The fourth one, of course, is another critical issue of looking at how we can, of course, it's a function of our refineries and all that. All the pipelines, infrastructure, moving from south to north have already degraded. You know, that is how we ended up having to move on the surface. Otherwise, the product should have been moving through the pipelines to Kaduna Refinery, Kano Refinery, and other locations like the Suleja Depot. Then people can take it to the last mile. But the argument is, even if you take it from Suleja or the Kano Depot, you have the last mile issue like what happened in Jigawa. So infrastructure, sensitization, safety protocol by the downstream operators, and assurance of safety assurance by the regulatory agency of the NNPC is very important. And I use this opportunity to say it's not just the government. All the leaders, community leaders, should be speaking to their people to know what to do when they see this, because life is very important. It's very unfortunate what happened in Jigawa and what has been happening all over the place. But the trend is becoming a trend, and it shouldn't be a trend. This should be incidences. It's no longer becoming an incidence, it's becoming a trend. And that is why it's an issue.
Right. And to what extent would you agree, because the government has said it's going to kickstart a needed investigation into the matter. It will not be the first time, as we all know, that ghastly accidents like this will occur, government coming in and adding that it will probe. So people have said in the past, experts have posited in the past that now is the time for governments to fix or make alternative modes of transportation of this volatile, this volatile substances, chemicals, and the likes. Apapa depots, and all the adjoining depots also would need to be fixed. What do you think about this arrangement if we can get it to work?
Yeah, like I said earlier, Kemi, you are spot on with that point. But like I said, we have a snag. The critical pipeline, the critical infrastructure is a huge investment. You are aware that for almost 15 years, we are not able to even do a turnaround maintenance on these refineries. And it is the same thing with the overall pipeline layout, across the country. They have degraded. And some of these pipelines also are in locations where you have insecurity. So while we are addressing this long-term issue, because it's very important, I also mentioned the last mile issue. So when you address the issue from Lagos, for example, to Niger State or to Abuja or to Kano, Kaduna, what happens from, like the tanker that took the product from Kano heading to Unguru, because this truck that capsized in Majia in Jigawa was en route Unguru. There is no way you can say you have to lay pipeline from Kano to Unguru, for example. Then you end up having to have pipelines everywhere. So the last mile issue has to do with the infrastructure. Are the roads okay? And why are the tankers leaking, for example? And all those other safety mechanisms that are very critical. But I will land with what you said earlier. All the other incidences I reeled out when we are doing the snapshot of the trend analysis, we have not had any reports that will come out to the area that has to do with the public to know that, okay, these were the root cause, and these are the do's, these are the don'ts going forward. I hope this time around, this will not be a lip service, that there will be a follow-up, a full impact assessment, not just on what happened in Jigawa. And that is why I'm using this as an opportunity to do a trend assessment. There should be a trend analysis and impact assessment so that we'll have a holistic, approach to a solution going forward. Incidences may happen once in a while, but because it's becoming a trend, we should look at it and come out with a report, and Nigerians should hear what happened and where they have a role to play. And everybody has a role to play to ensure that this doesn't happen again, with the government starting on its own to do the needful. Also, the response time of the Emergency Management Agency in terms of its resources, in terms of resource allocation, in terms of managing information, is also another very important factor to be considered in the overall solution approach as a going forward, view, as far as I'm concerned.
Interesting stuff. So, oftentimes, beyond the loss of lives and property, there is also something that we often do not talk about, which is the legal accountability and justice. You know, especially looking at the incidents in Jigawa explosion and some other things that had happened. We only hear of, okay, the government trying to rebuild, helping other people, the families of the victims, and all of that. But what kind of accountability, what legal avenue can be explored to ensure, especially where safety protocols had not been respected, by some of these companies or tankers? What kind of legal avenue can be explored to bring some of these errant persons to book?
Very good question, Ibrahim. There are two ways to it. First of all, we talked about regulation. I talked about regulation before. We have an agency whose job is to monitor compliance, which includes safety. So there must be, first of all, you talked about accountability, and there should also be responsibility and consequence management. If it is found out that the operator has not done his job, we already have provisos within the ambit of the procedures for the regulators to take action. So are they taking action? For example, and if they are not taking action, then the president has to do something about it. There must be consequence management for people to sit up, because safety is key in oil and gas, just like it is in aviation and all that. So it is important to have a mechanism to monitor compliance, to monitor also execution and enforcement. Then from the point of view of the legal angle you are talking about, because of a lot of death of lack of, either education or knowledge. But then it's a catch-22, because in a case where a tanker capsizes and the locals rush there to scoop fuel, and an incident happened, from a legal perspective, I don't know how, they can be charged for legal encumbrances where it is an accident which is subject to investigation. If that vehicle fell because there was a pothole and the residents now rush there to scoop fuel, then it's very difficult to put responsibility on that organization. But where the organization, ab initio, has a tanker that is leaking fuel, then even if the incident happened in this manner, there's a chunk of responsibility that for example, the oil and gas organization or the operator or the marketer or the transporter, because sometimes the product is not owned by the transporter. Like I said earlier, it must be outsourced. So within the legal framework, there is and there should be, and it should be tested, and we should set examples. If the transporter is not properly taking care of the tankers, then there should be some responsibility on the tankers, not just a civil matter, but including criminal case, because negligent homicide should be considered where you are refused to take, steps to ensure that you have done your own part in terms of ensuring compliance with safety protocols. And if that is done, it's not just a matter of compensation. There should also be culpable homicide, indictment, subject to investigation and prosecution. These are the things that will be deterrents and make all the stakeholders to do what they are supposed to do. And if it is the product owner that owns the transport system, well, then they will have to take responsibility as well. But where government officials fail to do the needful to ensure compliance, that is where political will of Mr. President or the GMD or NNPC or anybody that has that overarching, role should ensure that there is consequence management. Part of the problem of Nigeria is everybody does what they want and they get away with it. And there's no follow-ups. And examples are not set. So it becomes a norm.
Quick one now, follow-up now to this, because one could also say having that sense or the wisdom to take this needed actions, balancing the interest concerned, because, preliminary investigations say there is a level of fault with government, perhaps with government, with the people, and so on. So in terms of moving on, healing in the community, a quick few seconds, Mr. Baba.
Well, in terms of healing, I see the governor of Jigawa State has gone there. They have gone around. I saw him visiting the hospitals, to see the injured people, to speak with them. But there's a lot of psychological, emotional, and mental, follow-ups to be done by the community leaders, by the politicians. This is a location that has councillor, local government chairman, state assembly member, federal house of reps, senators. How are they going to come to demonstrate responsibility and empathy in supporting these people in this moment of grief, in this difficult time? This is what
absolutely. I'm afraid, you know, because of our time, we just quickly have to race on. Group CEO of Global Investment and Trade Company, Baba Yusuf. Thank you so much. It's always a delight to talk to you, especially on this very important topic.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for your time. All right.